Welcome to the GCI conference. Thank you. Please stand by. You will now be placed into conference. There are 13 participants in the conference.
Hey, Bruce Schulte here.
Hello?
Hi.
Is the meeting going on?
It has not started yet.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll call back then?
I would stick around. We're scheduled to start in just a couple minutes.
Okay. All right. I'll put it on mute and just listen.
All right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, Klinkart, and Carrie are here and waiting. Standing by.
Good afternoon.
This is Lauren. I had a technological difficulty getting on, but I'm now on. So is Mr. Miller on? Is Mr. Schulte on?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime on?
Yes.
Mr. Deshuk is on?
Yeah.
Mr. Miller, are you on?
I am.
Okay. Ms. Wilson, are you on? Director Klinkart, you are on.
Yes, sir, and Carrie is standing by to record.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Wilson, are you on yet? Okay. Is Ms. Sawyer going to be on the line as well? Mr. Klinkart, is Ms. Sawyer going to be online?
I believe so, but I'm going to text her right now to make sure.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Jane Sawyer.
Oh, hi, Jane.
Hello.
Glad you're on. Okay.
Thank you.
Is Ms. Wilson online yet? Okay, I'm going to wait a couple minutes because I think it's important that since she's been doing the majority of the work here, that we need to have her online. I hope you all can hear me. My fancy $200 earphones wouldn't connect to my phone, so I'm back to an old set of earbuds.
I can hear you.
Okay, that's good. Ms. Wilson, are you online yet? Ms. Wilson, are you online yet? Ms. Wilson, are you online yet? Okay, let's go ahead and call the, Ms. Craig, are we recording?
We are recording now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, Clinkhart?
Yes.
I just got a text. Thank you, sir. Just got a text from Ms. Wilson. She's trying to call in now. She was on the phone with Law.
Okay. Ms. Wilson, are you online yet? Okay, I'm going to call the Marijuana Control Board meeting of April 10th, 2020 to order at 1:03 p.m. And I would note that myself as chair, Mr. Miller, Mr. Jaime, Mr. Schulte, and Mr. DeShook are online. So, Ms. Craig, you can show that's the roll. Mr. Clinkhart, yourself, and Ms. Sawyer's online. Is Ms. Wilson online now?
I am. Can you hear me?
Thank you. I can. Thank you.
Good. I apologize for the delay. I was gathering
no problem.
for you. Okay.
Okay. So we have our roll call, and the agenda is one very broad item. It is the emergency meeting to discuss the Marijuana Control Board's response related to the COVID-19 matters. Just for all of the public that is signing in or signed in on the call, we won't be taking any public testimony today. This is a discussion with the board and our attorney, and we would appreciate it if you would keep your phones on mute so that we can have our discussion. So hopefully we will not have to take up the full 3 hours that we have allotted. This is my third multi-hour video or Zoom or teleconference in the last 14 hours. So my ears need a rest, if nothing else.
The public was notified that we were going to give testimony today.
How were you notified? Because that's not on our agenda.
On the memo that went out, that you guys are going to take public comment at some point today.
Mr. Clinkhart, did we send out any memo to anybody saying we were going to take public testimony?
I don't have any memo. I'm going to check the one that was posted here momentarily online.
The agenda I have in front of me does not mention public testimony.
Mr. Chairman, the staff is indicating to me that apparently there was a miscommunication and they actually did post something to that, even though my memo here does not show that.
Okay, thank you. See here. I see it. It's in the public notice. Says here the board will reserve a time period on Friday for public comment regarding items not on the agenda. and not related to regulations currently out for public comment. Any public comment that we would take would not be related to the agenda item today, which is, so we will reserve some time at the end for public comment on items not related to the agenda, because that is apparently what went out on the public notice, but it is not actually on the agenda. So we will backtrack ourselves a little bit on that. If I can just sum up, please, Mr. Miller.
Hey, can we do a disclosure before we get started as well?
Absolutely, we could do that. So the board governance tab. Okay, so the board governance tab is a time for any of us to disclose any changes in our status, either within the marijuana industry or any other statuses that we might have. It might affect our business and be either a conflict or something that we need the public to be aware of. So, Mr. Deshuk, have you had any changes since the last meeting?
No changes.
Okay. Mr. Schulte, any changes?
No changes.
Mr. Heine, any changes?
No changes.
Mr. Miller, any changes?
As previously disclosed, I am a member of the AMIA board, and at a board meeting earlier this week, these issues came up. The board paused, and I made a decision whether I should or should not participate and listen. I did choose to listen since I am the industry representative. I thought it was good that I get the industry perspective. And I have also talked to several other licensees in the course of normal business that I would do, and these subjects came up quite often. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of those.
Okay. And I have had no changes in mine either. Ms. Wilson, any part of Mr. Miller's declaration cause us any concern at this meeting?
No, sir. I would expect that to be a usual occurrence for the member of the industry, and so long as he can, neutrally and objectively make decisions, he can go forward.
Okay. All right. So, if I may just summarize where I think we are, and related documents. At the last meeting, we asked our attorney to review the emergency orders and declarations that have come out of the governor's office, and to how we might be able to fit under those issues with issues before the industry, one of which was transportation, one of which was curbside and walk-up delivery services, and I believe we talked about some packaging issues. We also talked about issues related to just overall operations, and she has done so. I believe in our emails this morning, there was one document that was sort of the background information on all of the various declarations and mandates that could apply. Also, a very good summary of the issues that...
but I'm putting the phone down until I finish helping Leah.
Whoever's talking on the phone, could you mute your phone, please? And a document that is Mr. Miller's review of the issues before him that he is bringing to the board. We also received a copy of a chart matrix that the AMIA put out for some background information for us. We also received some information from Ms. Sawyer well, I guess we also received from the attorney a draft emergency regulation that I guess will be probably the first thing that we will discuss. And then we have information from Ms. Sawyer about some deadlines in terms of local government protest notices. And so we will also take that up. So where I think we're at this point, barring any other board members' comments, is to basically hear from our attorney and as to where she thinks we're at, what she thinks is the best course of action for us to take today, and any process that she thinks that we need to go through to make sure that we are following all the rules as are necessary, so whatever actions we take today won't be questioned because we didn't do the process. They might be questioned because maybe we didn't vote the way we thought we would or whatever, but we don't want to avoid anything we do by process errors. So with that, if I could turn this over to our attorney, Ms. Wilson, and have her either correct me and move us forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see this process as threefold regarding your consideration of emergency regulations. The first, to review the draft findings of an emergency and to see if the board agrees with them and is in a position to adopt them, because absent your finding an emergency, it doesn't make sense to consider emergency regulations. The next thing to consider, should you find an emergency, is the topics that are identified in a draft 3 AAC 306995, emergency regulations to respond to COVID-19 outbreaks. So you're aware, Mr. Miller noted that I had a reference to alcoholic beverages in 2 places in that draft, and I'll let you know where I fixed that to remove it and refer to marijuana and marijuana products. And I see that as a diverse discussion of your board as to whether you want to address issues. The issues primarily, I would say, the industry has raised, with the purpose, and I repeat this, the purpose is to protect the public health, not secure financial revenue. I mean, that's what this emergency declaration is all about. So it would be measures to protect the public health by mitigating the amount of contact between licensees and their buying public, or other issues such as transportation. And the last issue is that depending on what decisions the board is making here, we are following a very coordinated process in the Department of Law, and to ensure that I have adequately stated the emergency and you have I had adequately drafted the emergency and you have adequately found the emergency, even though it diverts a little bit from our drafting manual of administrative regulations. I would like to run that by the law and regulations section and then our Attorney General's office. So the timing of that process, expect it to add 2 to 3 days, just knowing how it's been going with other clients. There may be the possibility that if some changes are made, we would need a very quick board meeting and they're substantive, for the board to adopt these again as final, but that meeting can be held with 24 hours notice. So you can get your licensees, well aware of how they can operate going forward. I remind folks, I think I misrepresented. I may have told Ms. Wilcox that these emergency regulations would be good for the length of the emergency. Emergency regulations are limited to 120 days unless made permanent. So we'll have to address that situation in the future should this go beyond 120 days. And I think that's all I have unless you have questions, Mr. Chair.
No, apparently he's asleep.
I think he may be on mute.
Oh, yes, I am on mute.
Okay.
I was trying to tell the person that said somebody was asleep to mute their phone, but that didn't work. So the first step is to review the draft findings, finding of emergency. That is the document that was sent to you. It was 2 pages. And the second page, you'll see a filing certification with the Lieutenant Governor, and it would be signed by the Director. So let's just sort of go down the list of our members, see if anybody has any particular questions on the finding of emergency. So I will start with Mr. Miller.
I have no questions, and I have reviewed the document.
You have?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make sure. I didn't want you to say you haven't. So, Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I've read it and I have no questions or comments. Thank you.
And Mr. Heine.
Through the chair, I do have a few questions for
Sure.
the attorney. Just the first question is on the email you sent, the last email you sent. It says, we are in odd procedural posture in that the governor has not yet suspended any Title IV statutes that would permit curbside delivery.
I'm sorry, sir. That was an error. That was for the
alcohol.
Yeah, I apologize,
Okay.
and I think I was just working too quickly.
No, that's understandable. But,
All right.
so with the draft legislation or the findings of emergency, I have read this and I agree with majority of up into 11 and 12. If we're establishing that as emergency, are we finding that it's emergency as far as the health mandates as pertains to the public in general, or for specifically the marijuana regulations?
You would be, through the chair, you would be taking basically the declaration that the legislature and the governor has made, which is basically paragraphs 1 through 10, and then figuring out whether those mandates cause you to believe that even if a business qualifies as an essential business, you can go farther to protect the public and to minimize the spread of COVID-19 by putting additional measures in place. So that's what 11 and 12, those are the paragraphs that, so long as you agree with the governor and the legislature about that, yes, we are in an emergency, 11 and 12 says what you're going to do to mitigate it for the subject matter you have authority over. Is that clear?
So I'll just ask questions. It is clear. The only question I have is, shouldn't that be a separate document with 11 and 12 stating those opinions versus establishing the findings of emergency? I'm just asking. I really don't know.
I reviewed the manual, the drafting manual. I can certainly ask that question going forward of the law and regulation section, but from what I saw, you had to make findings of an emergency, and as long as you agree with the findings of the legislature and the governor, I didn't.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up there.
As long as you agree with the findings of the legislature and the governor, I didn't see any problem of including that in your findings as well. But you might shorten it to say, based upon the emergency declared by the governor and interpreting these mandates.
She went back to get weights on packages.
Whoever's talking on the phone and talking about weighing packages, would you please mute your phone?
Then just have paragraphs 11 and 12.
I've got the Alaska joint.
I'm sorry, Miss Wilson. I couldn't hear the last portion of your statement.
I think you have two choices. One is to adopt, in essence, the findings of the governor and the legislature and have it all in one document. And the second is to have just a very brief second document, a single document that says, in the first paragraph, the governor has made a declaration of emergency, the legislature has made a declaration of emergency. Here are the steps AMCO is taking or MCB is taking to respond to that. So you would basically be shortening 1 through 11 into 1 through 10 into very limited description.
No, I do appreciate your explanation, and I feel that's what it should be, the way it should be done, because, you know, if I vote no on 11 and 12, it looks like I'm saying there's no emergency, and that's not the case. I mean, I am well aware that there is a pandemic going on, and this is, you know, there is emergency in the state of Alaska, these health mandates and everything else. So I would support separating these items, if you guys wouldn't mind. I mean, it puts anybody who is leaning against voting for any of these regulation changes in a predicament, saying, because we vote no, it looks like we're denying science, and that's not the case.
I see.
Okay. Any other questions at this point, Mr. Jaime?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. DeShook, any questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. I have a couple of questions, and specifically on number 11. I understand that the business that can maintain social distancing and requirements and can prohibit congregations of 10 or fewer people in a business at a time, including employees, can operate. And that, I think that's one. I would object just more on, not because that I don't agree with the sentiment behind it, but under our rules, under 1738 and the initiative that passed, it basically says this board has no authority over medical marijuana. And to include that we would qualify as engaging in healthcare operations, I think is a finding that I can't support. You know, I realize that many people purchase marijuana for medical reasons. We have some pretty strict regulations that talk about bud tenders and businesses cannot talk about the medical benefits, cannot argue for the medical benefits, cannot advertise the medical benefits, simply because we don't have authority. We are recreational marijuana. So, Ms. Wilson, can you, does that make any sense to you? Is that an issue that we should deal with?
That makes perfect sense to me. I'm trying to remember the source, if I either saw in an FAQ that facilities or licensees may, in a tangential way, fall under the healthcare exception, or if I saw that from other states. And I'd have to go back and look at the documents to see that. But I do think that just using the social distancing requirements, I'm imagining would work for most licensees who are who believe they operate under as a critical business.
Okay.
So I wouldn't see any issue with deleting that.
All right. The other, go back to Mr. Jaime's question, and I wasn't sure I was tracking, but was Mr. Jaime's suggestion that we sort of roll 1 through 10 up into a statement that we recognize that pandemic is going on, that many emergency orders have been done, and we're just following on that, and so 11 and 12 would be separated. I'm not quite sure how that would look. So could you explain that a little bit more, how we might separate out 11 and 12?
I'm doing this as a drafter in action right now, but I understand Mr. Jaime's point that he doesn't want any assertion that he doesn't believe we're under a public health emergency, and if he votes against this, or he or other board members. So what I would do is create a new paragraph 1 that would basically say, on March 11th, 2020, the governor issued a declaration of a public health disaster emergency in anticipation of the spread of the COVID. Pursuant to that declaration, he has issued a number of mandates and perhaps identified the mandates which are most important, and then say to further advance the purposes of those mandates as applied to the marijuana industry. The board believes these additional emergency findings are applicable, and then just have paragraphs 11 and 12. So I wouldn't talk about how many people died or, what the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs is doing. And I think that would be sufficient. Again, I'll be putting it aside a law and regulations section.
Okay. Is there any discussion from the board related to that idea? I know that's not a motion yet, and maybe it won't be, but I just wanted to make sure there was any discussion from board members about that particular suggestion at this point. Mr. Miller?
None.
Mr. Schulte?
Yeah, I do have, I just want to clarify something, if I may.
Sure.
And I guess I'll form this as a question for Mr. Jaime. If I understand correctly, the concern is with paragraphs 1 through 10, and it sounds like we could distill those down into one more concise statement, but that you were okay with the inclusion of an 11 and 12, recognizing that Mr. Jones has some other comments. To understand that much correctly, Mr. Jaime.
Yes, through the chair. I'm good with 1 through 10. There's definitely a finding of emergency, and I think that we as a board should say, if we're going to move forward and vote on anything else. So yes, there is. These are the findings of emergency. So 1 through 10, I'd love to vote on that separately, and then 11 and 12 maybe include the paragraph that the attorney was mentioning, so that there's two separate documents. One would consist of, and I was trying to follow as she was speaking, it looks like number 4, 11 and 12 in a separate document that we could vote on separately than the findings of the emergency. Thank you.
Maybe 6 packages in total.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm still confused because I thought in listening to the attorney's description, I thought we were talking about distilling 1 through 10 down into basically one more concise paragraph, to be followed then by paragraphs 11 and 12, which I guess they would be paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 at that point. Are we on the same page here, or did I just completely misunderstand this?
Mr. Schulte, I think if I can sort of summarize what I'm thinking, and Mr. Jaime can correct me, he felt that he might not be able to support 11 and 12. And so if we voted on this as a complete document, he would be voting no also on 1 through 10, which he believes are supportable. And so he was looking for how we might recognize that there was a pandemic, there was emergency orders, and that we could vote for or against 11 and 12 without voting on the other parts. And so I think the attorney was looking at, instead of this document would be rewritten so that 1 through 10 would be in a summary, paragraph 1. Then we'd have 11 and 12, and we could adjust those, and then we'd basically be voting on that without denying, with a no vote, that we had an emergency. I think that's what Mr. Jaime was driving toward, and he can certainly correct my summation.
Thank you for the clarification. It is, thank you. It's just I don't want to be a no vote, and people look at this vote and say, well, I guess Lieutenant Jaime doesn't think there's a pandemic going on.
I understand.
Right.
That's
Mr.
just one of my concerns.
Does that clarify for you?
It does. So I guess then the remaining question is just, structurally or procedurally, what would this look like? So we have two documents in front of us. Would one of them be the finding of an emergency and the other one not, or would they both be a finding of emergency? I guess that's where it becomes muddy in my mind.
And Lieutenant Jaime, thank you for clarifying your thoughts. I was thinking there would only be one document that would summarize all of everything I said about the governor's declaration and mandates. I wasn't thinking of a separate document where the board agrees that there is indeed a public health emergency. If that's the board's preference, I could break it into two documents. Regulatorily, it's really not required, and it might be looked at. The law and regulations section might be concerned about why that's happening, but I certainly understand the lieutenant's, position that he doesn't want to deny that we're in the middle of a pandemic. That said, if he votes no on it, I think he's voting on the entire document. He's not just voting on a paragraph one.
Ms. Wilson, if a question just procedurally here, rather than go through a full rewrite and procedurally, if after number 10 there was some kind of a statement like the Marijuana Control Board in reviewing and complying with the emergency as declared in the above statements, we further find related to the marijuana industry, and then go into 11 and 12. And then we could, as a board, vote on the contents of 11, vote on the contents of 12, and move forward from there without voting on 1 through 10 until we said this is a document that we would want submitted up to the governor's office. So is that a possibility rather than have to do that, is just put in a statement in between 10 and 11 that clarifies the Marijuana Control Board in furtherance of 1 through 10, figures this is how it impacts the industry.
That's certainly possible. I would put the question back to Lieutenant Jaime if that would be sufficient for his purposes, or anyone else who's considering not endorsing.
Yeah, that would be. For me, it's just, unfortunately, sometimes it boils down to the perception. So if it's separate out the votes, absolutely, I'm all for it. I just, because there is an emergency going on, and I'm willing to acknowledge that, definitely. But there's certain things within the regulation proposals that I disagree with, so I just want to keep things separate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there any other comments from the board members? Hearing none, then, as we're sort of in unprecedented times here, if I could ask the attorney, when we get done today, to put in that sort of explanatory sentence between 10 and 11. And then as a structure, I would like the board somebody to make a motion to accept number 11, and we can make changes and amend that. Once we've acted on that,
I'm going to let you.
Have a motion to accept 12. We can make amendments or changes to that. And then basically we would have a document that
No.
we could then vote on up or down.
Exited out of the transfer. Packages haven't been made.
Person who's talking about a transfer, can you please mute your phone? Oh, that worked. Ms. Wilson, does that make sense to you?
It does, and if I can do two things at once, I will try to write that paragraph as you're...
Okay.
I hope you don't think that I'm not listening to you when you discuss the merits, and get that back to you while this meeting is happening. I do note, I think paragraph 12 obviously will have to be adjusted to address whatever measures might be approved by this body. So that's a work in progress.
Okay. Okay, so with that, can I have a motion to adopt paragraph 11?
Would it be appropriate to make I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I think we need a motion in order to make amendments or to make changes or to suggest changes to the paragraph, and then we would vote on that, and then we could be done with that and move on to number 12.
Well, there's not actually a motion on the entire document. I mean, wouldn't it be normal to make a motion on the entire document and then make edits?
Probably, maybe, but I don't know that we would want to make any changes to 1 through 10
Okay.
So
In that case,
I think I would just like to work on 11 and 12, and then we can do the whole document as changed. But yeah,
sure. Well, Mr. Chairman, I get what you're saying. If apologies for interrupting you. I move then to adopt paragraph 11 as presented.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Okay. So we now have a motion on the floor on paragraph 11. Is there any board member that wants to propose any wording changes or any amendment to paragraph 11?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, I would move to, in the last sentence of the paragraph, I would move to strike the first portion that says these licensees would qualify as either engaging in healthcare operations, cultivation, sale of marijuana, etc. I would move to modify that to simply say those licensees would qualify as, and then strike everything up to this next line down where it says as businesses that can maintain social distancing. Basically take out the part that says either engaging in healthcare operations, cultivation, sale of marijuana for medical purposes, or as. Strike that as kind of what you were talking about earlier.
Okay.
Technical amendment, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Wilson.
If I wonder if we could change the word could to may, so the sentence would read, those licensees may qualify as businesses that can maintain social distancing requirements and prohibit congregations of 10 or more people, it shouldn't be fewer, in a business at a time, including employees.
I'm certainly fine with that technical change.
Okay. Okay. So then the last, as I view this, the last sentence would read, those licensees may qualify as businesses that can maintain social distancing requirements and prohibit congregations of 10 or more people in a business at a time, including employees.
10 or fewer.
No, it's prohibit congregations of 10 or more.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. The wording actually says fewer.
The attorney made. Yeah. Yeah, that's why the attorney said to remove fewer and put in more.
Yeah.
Caught right up. I need more coffee.
Through the chair this time, I have a quick question for the chairman.
Yes.
The sentence above that one says essential services and critical workforce infrastructure may include, it says many marijuana licenses. I'm just asking, do we need to elaborate on what many means as far as...
Let's deal with this amendment first, and then we'll go back to that.
Okay.
So on the amendment, is there any discussion? Okay, so on the amendment, Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mr. Heine?
No.
Mr. DeShook?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, so now, Mr. Jaime, you had asked about the, under this order, amended essential services, critical workforce infrastructure may include many marijuana businesses. Your comment was related to the word many. Could you elaborate?
Yeah, I'm just, and I'm asking, I don't know if we need to do that at all. We need to elaborate on what many marijuana licenses are. Do we need specific saying, for cultivation or whatever it may be, do we need to elaborate, is all I'm asking. I don't know if we need to or not.
Ms. Wilson.
Mr. Chair, I kept that as general as possible because I honestly don't know how many licensees can qualify, can abide by the social distancing requirements. In my imagination, there could be some that can't do that because their space is too small or I'm trying to think of another reason. Or they have too many employees that need to be on site. So I left it vague. I mean, if the question is, can cultivation facilities qualify? Yes, they can, if they fit the social distancing and size requirement. Can manufacturing facilities? Yes, they can. Can retail stores? Yes, they can. Can testing labs? Yes, they can. So if you wanted to identify the specific types of licensees, you can expand that there. But I think it's really dependent upon their physical space as to whether they fit under the order as an essential business.
Okay, Mr. Jaime, any follow-up?
No follow-up, Chairman.
Okay. Having not been to a lot of businesses, but to a number of them, I suspect that most businesses outside of retail would be easier to maintain the 10 or fewer and the social distancing when you start involving both staff and patrons. I think you run into a little bit more trouble. I think that's why some of our focus has been on retail. And I know in several businesses here in Juneau, breweries in particular, some are quite large. And so they could have 9 people on a shift and none of them be within 100 feet of each other because one's on the second floor and one's down in the ground floor, or one's in shipping and one's in the brewing process. When they get to their accounting staff, they have to send people home because their offices are much smaller. They look more like a typical office. So I assume that some cultivators, one I visited, the cultivation's on one floor, the manufacturing is on a second floor. So I'm assuming if you're on separate floors, you have the social distancing. So I think the word many just means, there may be some licensees that can't, but most of them can. And so I think many is fine. Is there any other questions related to either that word or any other part of paragraph 11 as amended? Okay, so on paragraph 11, as amended, we'll take the vote. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
No.
Mr. DeShook?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, paragraph 12, can I have a motion?
Move to adopt paragraph 12 as presented.
Okay.
Guilty.
Is there a second?
Second for discussion, Nick Miller.
Okay, Mr. Miller. Okay, discussion on paragraph 11. And remember, the attorney said, based on what we might do on the paper that says emergency regulations, it goes 995. This paragraph may get amended if we either add to or detract from that. So keep that in mind as you're commenting. Sorry, Mr. Miller, but you're on.
I'm on. Okay.
Yes, you're.
All right. So we have that document that hopefully everybody has a copy of that was distributed, and if the board's okay, I'd just like to go through each of these issues one at a time, discuss them, decide what action we want to take, and then once we get done, we'll be able to amend paragraph 12, if that's the path we would like to take at this moment. So
Okay.
the first option I would like to talk about is to allow handoff of transfers. I couldn't find anything in the regulations that says this type of action is prohibited. So I'll go through a scenario that would be applicable as a licensee were to fly into Western Alaska, taking a transport to another business located in that area. The transporter would get off the aircraft and hand that package to an employee or the licensee of the facility they're delivering to. As everybody knows, one of the biggest carriers in rural Alaska has basically filed for bankruptcy, and other carriers have cut their schedules way back. So what that means is someone traveling into these locations may get stuck into communities, for at least overnight, maybe 2 to 3 days. And by being able to hand off the transfer at the airport, then they are not required to go into that community, go to the grocery store, go to the hotels, take cabs. It just really, if we could hand off at a location like the airport, it would really limit the exposure of that person visiting the community and hopefully help hold the community spread down of the COVID-19 virus. So that's the first issue, and I'm hoping that we can have some discussion around that.
Okay, I will take that as a form of a motion, and we'll just assume that it has been seconded because we've had this discussion before. So are there any questions of Mr. Miller or any comments related to the idea of a transfer as Mr. Miller has described?
Mr. Chairman, which document is he referring to? I can't seem to find it.
The second document that the attorney sent out, when she sent out the finding of an emergency, the second document was one that came from Mr. Miller, and it bold at the top goes, all of the issues listed below except one will help the industry comply with the governor's public health mandate 11. And the first block off is allow handoff of transfers. Do you have that document, Mr. Hyman?
I'm still looking for it.
Mr. Chair, DeShock.
Yes, Mr. DeShock.
So I just want to understand a little bit about what we're talking about in the transfers. So and I understand especially the off the road system. If we're could you use any various last mile type of logistics company to go from a cultivation facility in the Mat-Su up to Fairbanks just because whether licensed or unlicensed?
Mr. Miller.
I will say that there are transportation companies out there today that transport for businesses, but all of those transporters currently have marijuana handler cards, and it is their business model, so I'm not sure if that's what we're talking about or not. This particular item we're talking about doesn't really affect that relationship as it exists today. I'm not sure I understood the question.
So I'm saying if this is what we're considering, I'm just trying to get back to the original intent of the regulation to begin with. Why, if I have a shop in Bethel, for example, and I've got supplies right now, can you call a courier in Anchorage, ask them to pick up your supplies, deliver it to the airport for you, and then you go and pick it up? An unlicensed courier, for example, a regular courier off the street.
No.
And I think with the transported to a licensed marijuana establishment by a licensee or agent, relaxing that, I think we would be saying that if you wanted to, you could have basically anybody pick up your supplies, right? Any transportation company whatsoever, any logistics company could go and pick up the product and deliver it to wherever.
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
That's definitely not how this is proposed in that document. In the document, I said I don't believe that the regulation change is required, and the board could put on the record that handoffs to a licensee, an agent, or an employee of a licensee are allowed. So the odd part about this is I do own a business in Bethel. I can get on a plane, fly to Bethel. I shouldn't have said that. I can go to Bethel, meet my employee in the airport, and hand that employee this transfer, and I can get back onto my mode of transportation and leave. That employee can take that transport to the retail store. But to change the scenario, if I were to get on and go to Bethel and to deliver to another company, Cusco Cush, I could not meet them at the airport, hand them the transport, and then leave because we don't work for the same company. So it's how the regulation is being interpreted or enforced today. One business can already do this clear through the transport. It's when it goes from, let's say, business A to business B where it's not allowed. So it's a little inconsistent, I feel like, how we're enforcing it today. So did that explanation make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm trying to figure out. There's always the clear example of where the regulation isn't very effective or where it's over onerous. But yeah, I'm trying to consider what would be the additional impacts. That's all.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Holscher.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, this is James Holscher, Head of Enforcement for Alcohol and Marijuana Control. I kind of want to expand on the question that Mr. Deshak had. If I owned a licensed transport business, unlicensed business that does transports for marijuana, if I wanted to, in this example, deliver marijuana to Cusco Kush and to Alaska Buds, and they had two employees come simultaneously to pick up that marijuana from me at the airport, that could be done because I would be acting as an agent for both of them. So there is an effective measure if they work with the transport companies to already make this achievable and fall within regulations. So I just wanted to point that out to the board.
And Mr. Chair, this is Joan Wilson. May I interrupt for just a moment?
Please.
I have had a request to make some of the documents that we are discussing available to the public. I would think that would need the board's approval. I don't see any objection with it. And the second is, just in the discussion, I recommend that when you're discussing an issue, that the request be tied to the public health emergency and how permitting acts like this limit interaction. So granted, I understand some of these you're talking about as solely guidances on how you interpret your regulations, but I didn't think the point of today was to be a catch-all of other things you just want to fix because it's been difficult, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. And I think, if I might just interject on the handoff, one of the issues that we here in Juneau are discussing, and that was discussed last night at the governor's press conference by a reporter from Cordova, I believe, is there are many rural communities that are putting in very strict, you may not come into my community, you may not fly into my community, and that a handoff would avoid a person from Anchorage going to another community and then having to stay in that community versus handing off something and getting back on the airplane and leaving, which to me helps avoid the issue of someone outside the community coming into the community, potentially bringing the virus in, or they're concerned that they would. It eliminates the introduction of another human person into a community for somebody who doesn't live there and isn't returning home. So I think this does apply that way. I'm not sure that it necessarily decreases the amount of contact because you still have a person contacting a person. But they're not entering a business. They're doing it in the outdoors, which for social distancing seems to be a justifiable action if you can do something outside or outdoors. I would think that, whether you would do that in the baggage area of Anchorage Airport or out on the curbside might be a different discussion, but I do think it does maintain some of the social distancing. It does allow some communities that are rural, that are relatively isolated, to remain as isolated as possible. So I think it does come into that realm. But that's just, that's sort of my point of view. And maybe that helps Mr. DeShook's question. We do have transport companies that move product around. Their employees who do that have a marijuana handler's card. I don't think Mr. Miller's saying that the person flying out into a rural area wouldn't be somebody with a marijuana handler's card. I would assume that the metric manifest would say what company it's being delivered to. That company would sign off that they picked it up. So I think there's a couple of things here that definitely would fit the protecting the communities. I still think some communities don't want anybody coming in, and they just assume not have any airplanes coming into their community at all. So that may be a different issue. Are there any other questions of Mr. Miller's proposal that either that gets worked into the regulation or gets worked into how we view the enforcement at this point?
Through the chair, Mr. Jaime.
Yes, Mr. Jaime.
Just what you explained as far as long as it's all listed in matrix and in the proposed regulations that's clearly stated, I'm willing, I can go along with this. But there just has to be, it can't just be some, are there going to be even background checks for these people? There has to be some kind of regulations, maintained. It just can't be free for all. Give it to anybody and say, all right, take this up there, I'll pay you a few $100.
No, I don't think there was any suggestion from Mr. Miller that this would allow somebody without a marijuana handler's card to physically pick up a package in Anchorage, get on an airplane, drop it off in Bethel, and go back to Anchorage. This would simply maintain that instead of that person with a marijuana handler's card getting the shipment in Anchorage, going to Bethel, that he would not have to leave the airport grounds, go to the business in Bethel, go inside that business, deliver that product, get it signed off, leave that business, and maybe miss his airplane back and have to get a hotel room and spend the night or 2 nights. But that person would still have to have the marijuana handler's card. As I understood Mr. Miller's proposal, and he can correct me if I'm wrong.
And you are correct. And just for clarification, 3 AAC 306-750A states exactly that about a licensee and a marijuana handler's card. I'm just suggesting that the way that it's being currently enforced today isn't the way that we're discussing on the phone. The way it's being enforced today, depending on who flies it to this location, they have to go to the store. They have to do everything Mr. Jones said. But if it's between company A and company B, that's where the handoff isn't allowed to happen. And I know we're getting really in the weeds here, but I'm not sure that we need a regulations project or regulations to change this. I think it's more of an enforcement and policy guidance, in my opinion. And maybe
Okay.
our attorney can comment on that as well.
Ms. Wilson.
Mr. Chair, I would concur that looking at the 306-750, what Mr. Miller is proposing is not prohibited by any portion of the transportation section, and that you could issue a guidance. I don't know if another option, however, though, is to add a sentence to 306-750A that says something to the fact that handoffs are permitted between agents or employees of licensees. But I do not believe you need a regulatory change. I do think it's just a question of interpretation, and as long as the chief is good with it, I'm good with it. The chief and the director, I should say.
Okay. Any other comments from either Mr. Klinkard or Mr. Holscher?
No, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Then, who's that?
This is Chief Holscher here.
Yes. Yes.
I just want to, the regulations are for the board to interpret, and if this is something that the board interprets as being necessary at this point in time, enforcement doesn't have an issue with it as long as the licensees follow strict manifest policies by including everybody's name on there, so we don't have an issue.
Okay.
And the acceptor of the marijuana product needs to understand that they are signing for complete responsibility civilly for that product itself without it being weighed and without it being counted at the licensed premises. So that's all I would like to add.
Okay. Yeah, and that's my concern too. If a product had it shown up in my business and I rejected it because it was not the right product, it was moldy, it was dirty, I would have somebody I could send it back with, and in this case, that wouldn't be the case. And so my employee might be signing off that they accepted it, and then when it gets back to my business, I want to reject it because it either wasn't what I ordered, it wasn't a product that was acceptable for sale, and then I have to figure out how to return the product or destroy the product having paid my money for it. So I guess that's up for the industry to sort out amongst themselves because I doubt a retailer in that situation takes a product that is not good, is probably not going to go back to that cultivator or manufacturer anymore. So I'll just leave that up to the industry to sort out. But I agree with you, Mr. Holscher, that you pick it up in a parking lot and it's still sealed and it goes to your business still sealed, and the courier has already gone back home, it's yours. And you have to deal with whatever condition that product is in, either it's short or bad or whatever. Okay, so I took that as a motion, and so right now, if there's, I will wait and just see, is there any objection to looking at that as the handoff being allowable? We can deal with maybe adding a sentence when we get to the actual document. Okay, I'm not hearing any objections, so I'm going to agree that that's how we would like staff to operate, and we will decide whether or not when we get to 995 whether we need to add something in there or not. So the next item then is allow more time on transport stopovers.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I really hate to interrupt.
Yes.
I'm still getting requests from the public to review the documents that you're discussing. May those be posted online?
They may. I don't have any objection to those being posted online.
Okay. And Carrie, are you able to do that?
I'm sorry, Joan, what was the question?
Carrie, are you able to post the documents that are being discussed online?
That is actually being handled by Melissa, and I believe, she's working remotely, so it takes some time.
But can we assure the public that it's in process?
I believe so, yes.
This is Melissa.
Yes, Melissa, are you online?
Yes. Sorry.
The VPN remotely, I've been trying to upload one document, and it's been going for over 2 hours. So I will try to get it out there as soon as possible, but it may not be until after the meeting is over.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I think as long as you're doing your best,
wonderful.
yeah, you're fine.
Okay. Mr. Miller, the next item is stopovers.
Yes, I'd like to discuss stopovers. To give you an explanation, currently how things work, if a carrier is delivering product, let's say from Fairbanks all the way to the Kenai Peninsula, typically they'll drive down, go through the Matsu, make a bunch of deliveries. Then when they get to Anchorage, they have to arrange with of course by that time it's been a full day, usually coming into the evening hours. And at that time, they have to make arrangements with a local retailer to basically store the product all night. So they'll make that arrangement, go to that facility, they'll check the package in, the retailer will take it, and then the next morning they'll have the arrangements to come back to that facility, pick that product up, start doing all their deliveries again, and then get to the Kenai Peninsula. Again, time's running out. They'll have to spend the night down there again. So they've had to make arrangements with a retailer to go store all these deliveries and then come back in the morning, pick it up, and finish their delivery route. So I guess what I'm asking is for the consideration of allowing people to overnight with product at wherever they're staying. This would limit the amount of interactions at retail locations, having to go in when customers are there, drop the product off, and then come back again in the morning to retrieve it. So I think right now is, I believe that if the product was in the immediate control of the transporter for the overnight, I don't really see an issue with that, but I'm just trying to limit the amount of times they have to go into retail facilities. And, when they go into these facilities, they're coming into contact with the licensees, the employees, but they're also coming into contact with any customers that are in these facilities at that time. So that's what I'm asking the board to consider.
Okay, is there any questions or comments?
Through the chair, this is Jaime.
Mr. Jaime.
Oh, yes, sir. These transporters, they're already coming in contact with all these retail shops, as Mr. Miller stated. So what's, on the last stop, they can make arrangements with them to store the material. I think by allowing the couriers and transporters to maintain possession of all this marijuana, it becomes a public safety issue. If people know that they're rolling around with all this cash or marijuana, it does become a safety issue. And they're already going to the retail shops. They can make arrangements to store this. So I don't see a need for this change. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments?
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
I understand Mr. Jaime's point, but I can tell you that I have used my store in Anchorage as a hub for other retail stores in the Southeast. And I have, and we have suspended the process, I do take deliveries for certain businesses located throughout the state that I would not have taken a delivery from that courier or business. I do it as I guess, as a courtesy, being nice, if that makes sense. We have suspended that process. Unless we have a delivery coming for somebody, we won't take it, we won't accept it anymore. So.
Okay. Any other comments?
Chair?
Mr. Jaime.
Yes, and Mr. Miller, obviously you do care about your employees and public health and public safety, so I'd like to state that first. But, that's a perfect business opportunity for some of these businesses to charge for storing the marijuana. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bishop.
Yep. So the only thing going into any sort of vote that we have on this or reworking any of the suggestion is I'm not sure how this this is related to the health crisis declaration. So right now, as it's written in 306-750, you've got to go directly from pickup to delivery. Where if we change it to overnighting, you still have the same amount of interactions that are left, except for you have the added interaction of a hotel stay or some other different scenario. So though the regulation may need to be changed, I'm just not sure it falls under anything to do with the current health situation.
Is there any other comments or questions?
Through the chair, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Miller.
So, to expand on that expand on my earlier conversation, and sometimes I'm not good at explaining things, but there are retail stores outside of Anchorage that I would not normally do business with that come to my facility to pick up product that what we're calling as hubbing for. So I may have taken 3 or 4 deliveries from 3 or 4 different transporters of product coming into my store, and then I have an additional person flying in from a retail location to pick it all up. And I think the regulation states that they can't make any unnecessary stops. Well, if your travel spans an 18 to 24-hour period, I'm of the impression that that stop or stay overnight is necessary. No one can do business, for 18 to 24 hours without a rest period. So it is a necessary stop. We're just asking that during that necessary stop, they're able to keep that product with them at all times instead of dropping it off at different locations. Is that a better explanation?
Actually, it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other comments at this point? Okay. My comment is that in listening to the various, and I do nightly listen to the governor's press conferences. I listen to the explanation of the mandates. Several times they have answered the question, can I travel from my community to a remote area? Can I go to Hatcher Pass? Can I go down to my boat someplace and leave my community? The answer has always been yes, but. And the but is you're by yourself. You don't get into contact with other people in the community, that you can stay social distancing or physical distancing, that you are not unnecessarily moving from community to community, whether that's by car, whether that's by any other modes of transportation. And while I appreciate Mr. Miller, and I think this is a regulatory change that we could look at, but I find it very difficult given the governor's discussion, the Commissioner of Health and Social Services discussion, and the way I read the mandates. I find this very hard to say that by allowing somebody to have a stopover where they can leave Fairbanks, maybe spend a night in Anchorage, then a night in Kenai, and then get all the way back up to Fairbanks and spend 3 days on the road in various communities, in hotels. I just can't see that mode, that thing, fitting the governor's mandate of physical distancing, staying in your community, hunkering down, even for an essential business. An essential business might be freight delivery, so a trucker is doing that. I can understand that. I have a hard time with this. I don't have a hard time in fixing it for the future. I just have a hard time justifying that this is something that we need to do through an emergency order. Maybe Ms. Wilson has some different read on the governor's mandates on some of the things that he has said publicly.
Mr. Chair, I do not. I believe Mr. Miller will tell you that essential businesses still need to submit travel plans, and he might say that if the travel plan is approved and he's actually submitted them, so he'll have more experience to kind of relay something like this, then you would have at least, I think it's DHSS's endorsement that the mandates are being abided by. But as to anything you said, I don't disagree with that.
So Ms. Wilson, a travel plan, if I'm a miner out in Kensington and I have a camp, I think our mining plan, or our miners submitted the plan, been reviewed by our EOC, I believe, and it basically says person will fly in, we will take them to a quarantine spot, we will take them to the mine, they won't come in any contact with the community, and every miner goes through that. That's a good plan. That's a plan that's easily implemented and enforced. If you have a plan in which one time you stop at business A in Matsu and business B in Anchorage and business C and D in Kenai, the next time you travel, you go to business Y in Matsu, you skip Anchorage, you only go to Z in Kenai. On the third time you leave Fairbanks and you go to business X in Anchorage, drop off packages for businesses M, N, and O in Southeast, and go back to Fairbanks. You have to submit a travel plan to the Department of Commerce for every one of those trips? Because all those trips are different. It's not a standard process to get somebody off an airplane to a mine without them coming into contact with any businesses in those communities.
Mr. Miller, I think, has already submitted a transportation plan. He might be able to answer that for you while I look at and see what I can find out in the mandates or orders.
Okay. Mr. Miller?
So I have submitted a travel plan and will use it. And I would say that the travel plan is not, I'm going from point A to point B to C and D. The plan is I have to travel to different communities to support my business, and here are the things I'm going to do. You know, when I actually deliver the product, I'm going to wear a mask and gloves. I'm going to wipe down all my packages. Now I don't have to actually go inside the business, so I will update my travel plan. But the travel plan is not specific, at least the one I have filed and got approved, is not specific to each location I'm going to travel to. It's more of what am I going to do to minimize the transmission. I'm going to do that by staying away from people. As I said, you know, I'm going to wear gloves, wear a mask. I'm going to wipe my packages down. And if I want to really change the processes I use when I actually make contact with another person, then I would update my travel plan. But right now, it's just I go to these areas, here are the steps I'm going to take to minimize my contacts with other people, and so I do update it from time to time, but I don't update it every time I travel.
Okay.
And can I give one clarification on the hotel stays
Sure.
for the overnighting? The transporters or whoever's transporting the product, they're going to stay in a hotel anyway because of the duration of time. What we're trying to do is to minimize the contact with other businesses and customers for when they have to go in and store the product at night and come back and pick it up. So we're not adding it overnight because they're already staying overnight anyway. It's the transaction of taking the product and storing it overnight, then having to come back and get it. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I mean, I understand that, but the travel mandate, as I read it, is, you know, you need to avoid that contact. If you're going to your remote cabin, that's one thing. If you're going to a hotel, we basically have one hotel in Juneau that is closed. They say they haven't gotten anybody wanting to be there. They're not allowing people to stay there. The one that most legislators were in is still open, barely. But the mandate, as I read from the governor, was no unnecessary travel outside your communities. So, on a conference call I was on this morning, the community of Antioch has a school construction and airport construction, and they want those companies not to come there this summer. But it's federal funds and it's all kinds of questions, but they basically don't want anybody to come into the community of Antioch. So, that was my question. And I realize that we're probably going to show that marijuana businesses are essential, but I don't know if delivery of product is essential. But anyway, that's a different question. Are there any other questions of Mr. Miller on this one? Okay. So on the motion yes,
can we take a quick 5-minute break, or
we can.
Yeah.
Sure. I show it's 2:22. Stay on the line, and we'll reconvene at 2:30.
frozen, all the feet and everything are still frozen into the ground. So it's just easy to you can pop that one piece out of the feet and remove that one section.
Okay, I show close enough to 2:30. So I want to be sure, is Mr. Miller back online?
I am. Thank you for the break.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Jaime?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Deshak?
Yes.
Mr. Klinkart?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we are back on. Was there any further discussion related to the issue about allowing stopovers and transports as part of this emergency order? Okay, with that, I will just call the question, and I think we've had enough discussion. I would rather have a roll call vote on this one. So to include this in our discussions as we go through the actual regulations, Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mr. Jaime?
No.
Mr. Deshak?
Yes.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm a no, so that is passed 3-2. The next one is to allow the manifest transports to be checked as luggage. Mr. Miller.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, I would just like to have a discussion about allowing us to check transports as luggage. To give an example, I wouldn't see it much differently than how firearms and things like that are checked in today. Currently, if you're transporting a firearm, you have to go to the TSA oversize counter. I'm suggesting that we would do the same thing for a manifested transport. We would go to the TSA oversized luggage area. TSA would open it up and do their inspections like they currently do today when we're walking through. And once they complete their inspection, we would put a lock on the container and these plastic evident tamper seals and have the package transported. The reason I'm suggesting this is it would cut down on the amount of transports necessary between communities. Today we're very limited on how much we can actually carry by hand. So if we had the opportunity to check it, we could obviously take more, and instead of going to someplace once a week, we could possibly go every 2 to 3 weeks. So it would definitely help cut down on the amount of times we're traveling into the smaller communities. And as I discussed earlier, well, that's fine. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, are there any questions about checked luggage?
I have one, Mr.
Deshuk.
Through the chair, I am unclear where our authority is through the board would come in to suggest that we would be able to influence whether or not a company would take this luggage as checked or not, especially federal regulations. I'm not sure where we have any of the authority to address this.
Mr. Deshuk, I'm not sure if we wouldn't have any authority other than if we allowed it and a company with their policies would allow it, then it could go. The fact that we might allow it does not mean that an airline or a cargo that takes passengers would be willing to take that as checked luggage, and they would certainly have the right to say no. Mr. Miller, do you have any other explanation?
No, absolutely not. We're not trying to exert any influence on any air carrier whether they would do this. There are some that will, and we're just looking to get the authorization to be able to do it as a business. Currently, today, we're prohibited, so we can't use those services. That was a long way around saying what you said, Mr. Jones.
That's okay. Are there any other questions? Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Schulte?
Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, just a comment. I support this change, and we've had this issue has come up. It came up last summer where somebody had to gate check some product when they were flying. I think Fairbanks to somewhere else, or they were flying into Fairbanks, and I do see this as a reasonable way of mitigating a problem. It allows them a little bit more latitude. Maybe there's fewer people involved with the process, which would speak to the current problem. So I'm in support of this.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, through the chair, this is Jaime. Oh, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Jaime.
Oh. All right. Well, through the chair, I just want to say, and I think Mr. Deshuk actually mentioned this last time. It seems like we're using this pandemic as a reason to change regulations. We should be following, I think, normal processes, and we want to change regulations. Don't change them under the guise of a public health mandate. So, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Holscher.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through the chair, I just want to state that checking in undetermined amounts of marijuana, because you can check usually in baggage up to 50 pounds, couple bags each. So you're talking potential very large volumes of marijuana that are not under the security of the handler. and that are being handled, so to speak, from one point to another by an individual without a handler card, and you don't know if they're over 21. So I want to say that this doesn't fall in line with your guys' whole adopting of the Cole memorandum stipulations, and I believe that this would create more of an issue than it resolves. So I just wanted to let the board know my thoughts, because right now you have limited, I guess, you have enforcement, but you have, if you're creating an issue where it creates us having to go out in the field and investigate problems with lost marijuana, stolen marijuana, diversion caused by somebody in the airlines industry, because we all know that lost luggage is not something new. And the last thing I want to do is receive a call from a licensee saying that the airport misplaced 100 pounds of marijuana product. So I just want to go on the record saying that if you guys allow this, there is going to be some huge possible consequences.
Hey, Mr. Miller.
Through the chair, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but I'll catch it again.
That's okay.
The reason that the industry is requesting this is because it would cut down tremendously the amount of trips that someone would have to take. And I'm going to use an example, if someone wanted to transport 10 pounds of marijuana between point A and point B, that may require them to take 2 to 3 trips depending on how it's packaged. If that could be packaged and checked in, that could be 1 trip. And I'm not suggesting that for Mr. Holscher that it be checked in as normal luggage. If you check luggage in through the oversized counter at TSA, it is handled a little differently. It's not put on the luggage belt. You know, you have to go to the oversized luggage area to get it, and if it stays there, it's locked up. What was the third point I was making? Oh, these measures are temporary. Just to remind Mr. Jaime, these measures are temporary. These aren't permanently going to last. If it's something that wants to happen permanently, then we have to come back later. You know, this is being requested because it does cut back the amount of travel necessary for these businesses to continue to operate.
Any other comments or questions on the checked luggage? Okay, so on the motion to work the checked luggage into our regulations, Mr. Miller?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Wilson.
I do want to say that I believe Chief Holscher made some good points about whether this could be interpreted as not complying with the Cole memorandum, which I understand is a dead beat, but we still kind of act like it exists. So I did just want to validate that is something you should put into your thinking as you consider this. And I'm very sorry for interrupting.
Oh, that's okay. Cole memorandum at the federal level under then Attorney General Sessions said they weren't going to use it. We, as a board, read that in and passed the motion at a board meeting several years ago. That we are going to try to follow those. So that is a policy of the board. It's one that we have voted on. So that's taken into account. So on the motion of
can I make one more comment before we vote?
Sure, absolutely.
I would like to remind everybody that you know, weapons are checked as luggage today. Alcohol is checked as luggage today. Anyone who's traveled in rural Alaska has seen the 2 12-packs taped together as luggage going around on the luggage handler cart. That's not what we're asking for. We're asking to check it as luggage, oversized TSA counter, and, you know, it will only be delivered to the person who is flying. So I just wanted to put that out there as a reminder.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before I call for the vote?
Through the chair,
okay.
Mr. Jaime, Mr. Miller just, used that explanation, but I didn't read that anywhere. I mean, we're just assuming people are going to do follow certain policies and not others. I mean, just because Mr. Miller said that doesn't mean that's what everybody interprets this regulation change or recommendation as. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so on the question of trying to work checked luggage into our emergency regulations, Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mr. DeShock?
No.
Mr. Jaime?
No.
And I'm a no. So that one doesn't go through. Okay, the next item up is curbside walk-in drive-up delivery. Mr. Miller.
Sorry, I couldn't get my mute button off there.
That's okay.
So I would just like the board to have a good discussion about the possibility of allowing a curbside walk-up, drive-up delivery. This would help businesses better meet the health mandates of separation and keeping distances, not having people inside the business. You know, we could put some pretty good boundaries around it, you know, having marked parking spaces, making sure there's sufficient lighting, making sure that the area is under camera view. But we do have a lot of the public who don't want to come in to the retail store, and they're asking, you know, if we can bring out the product to them. I guess the way I see it happening is a customer calls in an order. That order is prepped and gotten ready. The customer notifies the store that they're there through a phone call or something. An employee would go out, check the consumer's ID, receive the payment, go back inside, make change, grab the product, bring it back out to the person in the vehicle, and they can leave. So today, the way it is with the licensed premises, you know, I don't know if it's just a matter of design or how things have happened, but all the licensed premises obviously have been inside. So I don't know if we want to consider this and maybe allow businesses to expand their licensed premises to include a few parking spots or an area outside their business where they could actually bring the product out to the consumer. That way it would limit the interactions inside the store in an enclosed area with other people.
Okay. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none.
Well, no, Mr. Chairman,
yes,
I guess I do have a... Oh.
Yeah, Mr. Schulte first, then Mr. Jaime.
Okay. Yeah, just quick. I am supportive of this in principle. I do think that there needs to be some boundaries on what could be allowed. And I think that Ms. Wilson has provided some language in one of the documents that I would be comfortable with you know, as a temporary measure. Just because I know it's gotten to the point where so many people are uncomfortable going into virtually any retail establishment. I do think that this would be an appropriate response to the current conditions. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Jaime.
Yes, sir. Well, through the chair, just, you know, we're putting a lot of this burden on this board to come up with this. Why don't we should place it back on businesses, and they can limit who goes in the office or into their businesses with signs. I mean, one person allowed business at a time, and that'll actually make the job easier on the employees, so they're not going in and out of the building, worrying about cash and touching everything. And it would just be easier if they limited who walked into the building versus us doing these proposed regulation changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other comment? Mr. DeShock?
Mr. Chairman, this is James Holscher.
Mr. Holscher.
I apologize, but I think it's only, I have to point out to the board that one of the main reasons why we have the training for marijuana handlers and them coming into a premises is to observe intoxication, to only limit people over 21 into that area. There's a huge concern of bringing marijuana to a curbside to a vehicle that might have minors in there. that might be serving or giving marijuana to somebody who's intoxicated. And I just want to mirror what Lieutenant Jaime said, that I believe this could be mitigated and resolved by the licensees, allowing X amount of people into the store at a time. There's already retail businesses that do the same exact thing. And I think we've already, the director and the board has already allowed the windows to pass through to individuals who want to purchase marijuana. And I believe that has been very successful, as I've observed it at a few places outside, where you have individuals coming up to a window and them being able to go in and purchase marijuana, and do that in a way where it creates that social distancing, it creates a barrier between the individuals, and it's still a licensed premises where there's a controlled sale. So I just want to say that I believe that there is a way for the licensees to resolve this and fix this, so to speak, problem. I think that this can be fixed where it makes it safe for everybody, because I don't see how much safer it is for an individual going from the store to the car. And, that creates a safety concern. Are we going to have robberies? Is there going to be somebody that knows this is occurring? At least in the store, you have alarm systems, you have camera systems, you have individuals who are trained to hit their panic buttons, and it is done in a safer environment. And quite frankly, if you have it reduced or have it brought outside, if somebody is going inside and committing a robbery inside a building versus outside, there's a whole aspect of intent. Was that person waiting? If they go inside somewhere, then there's obvious intent that they wanted to do that. But if this happens outside, I'm just thinking of the safety of the individuals purchasing marijuana and the licensees selling marijuana. The whole reason why we have legalized marijuana is to get people out of that environment where they felt uncomfortable and unsafe, to give them a safe place to purchase marijuana. And if we resort back to where they're bringing out marijuana outside in a public area to exchange hands from a licensee to the purchaser, I think that this does not fall in line with what the intent for recreational marijuana is. And you got to ask yourself, is this creating more of a safety concern than it's fixing? And in this case, I think it's creating more of a public safety concern than it would be fixing.
And Mr. Chair?
Ms. Wilson.
I just asked you to add into your discussion any municipal authority to perhaps not permit this activity, and how you would address public rights of way along the line that Mr. Holscher is discussing, where the premises really don't belong to the licensee or can't be included in the licensee's premises.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Through the chair. Mr. Miller.
Mr. Miller.
And there's going to be comments or concerns about any change we make, and we have the ability to put guardrails on this thing, right? Just as we heard, we could require the spots to be a part of the leased premises that the business has. We have customers. I'm trying to say how I can say this. By providing this service, we are better meeting the guidelines that the governor has issued in Health Mandate 11. It said we should consider curbside delivery, walk-up service, drive-up services. I had a customer, and I think I talked about this at the last meeting. We had a customer come into the store. They purchased something, and they said, "I hate being here. I'm going to call next time and have you guys deliver it like I did a couple of days ago." And I looked at them kind of strangely, and I'm like, we can't deliver it. It's against the regulations. And they're like, "Oh, well, I called the delivery service, and they brought product because I don't want to be out shopping, and I don't want to be out in the public." And so to say that we're making it more dangerous and it just doesn't feel right to me, then I know that by not doing it, I'm pushing people out to unlicensed places who are delivering to their homes, So I guess I'm just asking for us to be able to provide that separation that provides for the service, I guess.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. I had some of the same concerns that Chief Holscher and Ms. Wilson. In downtown Juneau, I know of at least 2 businesses that do not have any parking. They're in the downtown. They're not required to have any parking. The only parking they have available is on the street. There's no ability of them to designate a parking spot. Although given as many businesses that are closed in our downtown, there's no problem finding a parking spot. But I remember almost all of the plans that we've approved. The cameras on the outside doors state that they will be visible and have crude pictures within 20 feet. There is at least one business downtown at a public parking spot is easily more than 20 feet away from any camera. And I don't know how you would provide that service. Now, granted, we're coming into summer, so it'll be daylight most of the time. We won't worry about night vision cameras. But I do have some concerns. The other concern I have is if there's minors in the car, how we verify that the person picking it up was the person that ordered it. And you can verify that with a picture ID. So I really, really want to support this, and I'm just I'm not sure if we can write the sidebars enough into the regulations. I don't want to get us into a regulation that says we can do curbside and then try to have Mr. Miller's interpretation of how he would deliver curbside versus how somebody else might deliver that, and leave that up to enforcement to think about and to look at, and then 2 months from now get accused of misinterpreting the regulations or not enforcing the right regulations or whatever, because the regulation was so broad that Mr. Miller's way of doing it, going out, checking the ID, checking, make sure it's the right person, collecting the money, going back in, making change, coming out with the product. It's still the same person, all under camera. Maybe some other business might try to do it differently. And so I have some real concerns about, can we put the right sidebars on here? And are we, in a time of physical distancing, in a time of trying to protect our staff, are we, in essence, saying to Anchorage, Fairbanks, and maybe Juneau, enforcement's going to be there much more often, but enforcement's not going to get to Matsu, enforcement's not going to get to Kenai, not going to get to Kodiak to see how you're doing curbside delivery, and our police departments are not going to do it. So I certainly want to get there. I just don't know how I can. I may support this until we get to the actual regulation and see what we can write into the regulation. But I do have some concerns. We have several places out in Juneau that certainly have parking. We have some of the same issues with the alcohol regulations of restaurant being able to sell a factory sealed bottle of wine to a person in a car. I don't know why I would pay restaurant prices for wine when I could go to the packaged liquor store and get that same wine for probably half the price, but that's up to the consumer. But to me, the whole issue of zoning, the conditional use permits, so we do have some of those issues to deal with. So is there any other comments or questions right now related to curbside walk-up, drive-up delivery?
I just want to one clarifying question from.
Yes, Mr. Deshak.
So, as the board, just the implications of the vote, when we're talking the curbside pickup, every local government's going to have to go through the same process. We're not mandating it. So today we would just be giving, if we voted on it, regulation, we would be giving the green light to local municipalities to potentially observe whether or not they wanted to do this or not. And so because this falls under the emergency regulation, and if we start talking about having to expand the lease property, I'm unsure how it would have very much of an impact. I mean, from a timing standpoint, is the one thing I'd need to have clarified, and also, what the expiration date would be, whether or not it'd be more appropriate to try to get public testimony, go through a much more drawn out, normal, permanent change because of the timing.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I think you're right. I don't know if some of this is going to, in some communities, bring up local governance or zoning issues or conditional use permits. There may be some communities that don't have that as strictly. But one of the issues that we have to get to here in another hour or so is if we want to extend the protest. So I would assume that community by community may have some decisions about this, but I'm not sure how many. I did check with planning and zoning here in Juneau. They felt that under our conditional use permit, as long as it was in our regulations, they wouldn't have any problem with that, other than to know that there are some that don't have any parking requirements, and basically a person would have to park on the street. They can't designate that parking spot, so if they couldn't get the one right in front of the door and they got one that's two back, that would way beyond camera range, and really you couldn't do it. But so I do think local government is going to have more of a say here. I don't know what Anchorage might think about this, but I think in Juneau we wouldn't have a problem with planning and zoning, although we have been talking about that related to alcohol curbside delivery and delivery otherwise. But so I do think that's a question that we can get to if we can get to the actual wording. Any other questions related to the curbside walk-up, drive-up delivery? Okay. So, Mr. Miller, I'll vote on this one.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Mr. DeShock?
No.
Mr. Jaime?
No.
And I'm a yes till we get to the wording. So I want to move this on to get to some wording, and then I'll see if I change that. Mr. Miller, it is 3 o'clock. We scheduled this to 4. Ms. Wilson, can we go beyond 4 without any problem?
Oh, I'd have to look at the Open Meetings Act. I believe so, but let me verify that.
Okay. Okay.
And through the chair, or Mr. Chairman, I'm busy after 1600 hours.
Okay. All right. We will try to get as far as we can. So I would just ask that, Mr. Miller, if you can keep the next one, allow transport of product using commercial carriers short, so we can maybe get to the actual wording of the emergency regulation. I think that would be good.
I will try to keep it as short as possible. So, I was hoping to get the board to consider allowing businesses to use commercial transport carriers to transport marijuana products. The way I would envision this working is a marijuana business would take their marijuana in a locked-up container to a airport or to a air transport carrier. You know, there's a lot of small carriers in the state, and be able to consign that package to them for delivery. At the other end, that aircraft would be met by a individual from a business with a marijuana handler carrier. They would receive that package, take it to the facility, and check it in. So, again, you know, one of our largest air carriers, rural air carriers in the state, recently filed bankruptcy. There's a lot of small businesses out there that would benefit from this, but I think the big benefit is not having people travel from community to community, which is in support of the current health mandate.
Hey, is there any questions or comments from the board?
Just a comment from Deshak.
Yes, Mr. Deshak.
I think that that's something that makes quite a bit of sense when you consider if now we're talking about actual transporters. You could have different businesses becoming known shippers, going through the normal regulations. We have transporters that are doing numerous dangerous materials. They're going through the normal handling. They have facilities to hold it up. They know who's signing for it. I think that this is something that makes a lot of sense, especially for the amount of our state that's off of the road.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so hearing no more comments and questions on the vote on the transport of products using commercial carriers, Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Schulte.
Yes.
Mr. Deshak.
Yes.
Mr. Jaime.
No.
Okay, and I'm a yes. So do we want to talk about packaging changes or not? Mr. Miller.
Sorry, I was on mute again. I would just like to get clarification that, and I'm not sure this is in support of the health mandate, but I wanted to have like a 2-minute discussion about it. It feels like our supply chain for the marijuana industry is in jeopardy. We're getting shortages because a lot of the stuff we use is from, for better or worse, is from China. So if a package is not available and a manufacturer wanted to put that product in a similar package that met all of the regulation requirements, is that a request that could go to the director to be approved, or is that one that we require? I know for new products we require it to come back to the board, but I'm unclear if we delegated to the director the ability to approve, similar packages.
Mr. Klinkhart, do you have a recollection, or does one of your staff have some memory on this?
I don't think that I've been given that delegated authority unless something prior to my start. Jane, do you recall anything historically?
Hello. Can you hear me? One second.
I can hear you now, Ms. Schroeder.
Okay. What was the question?
The question was, does the director have delegated authority from the board to temporarily approve packaging changes if a package was no longer available from a vendor for whatever reason and they needed to change packaging? Would the director have that ability today to make that temporary approval and bring it back to the board?
Thank you. The approval comes through via an MJ-15, which is an operating change, and he is delegated the temporary approval for a change in the operating plan.
Okay, so
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Holscher.
I just want to say for the board, maybe this will help. When we had an issue with logos and packaging in the past, the board had determined if the licensees ran it by staff and it didn't sway far from what it was originally approved from, then that was okay with the board if it went through staff. So I just want to reaffirm that not only is a form there, but you guys in the past have said that with logos and certain types of packaging, you would be okay delegating that authority to staff.
Okay. Mr. Miller, does that answer your question? And it looks like the director does have that authority.
Yes, and thank you for the clarification on the whole situation.
Okay. All right. So we now have gone through Mr. Miller's proposal. There was a document that also came out from the attorney, and it basically is titled Emergency Regulation. It looks like a regulation and basically starts out and says 3 AAC 306 is amending by added a new section that reads. And so does everybody have a copy of that particular document?
I can just find it in my tabs.
Mr. Miller, do you have it?
I do, but I'm looking for it in a big stack of paper.
Okay. Mr. Schulte, do you have it?
I have it here somewhere. I will have it up on the screen here.
Mr. DeShock, do you have it?
Yeah.
And Mr. Jaime, do you have it?
What was the title of the document again?
It's titled Emergency Regulation, and it looks like a regulation. It has register blank blank 20, and then it says 3 AAC 306 is amended by adding a new section to read. It should have been in the second email that came from the attorney. Second or third email.
Mr. Chair, I can send it again if that would be of assistance to everyone.
Well, everyone has it. Mr. Jaime's trying to find it.
Yeah, it was sent out yesterday at about 4:57 is the date stamp on mine. April 9th.
Oh, I don't remember seeing it till this morning, but that's okay. So, Mr. Jaime, have you located it?
I have.
Okay. This would be, if I'm understanding, and Ms. Wilson can correct me, this would be attached to the one that would go to the Lieutenant Governor. This is the one that might affect paragraph 12. This would be the actual emergency regulations that would be potentially promulgated to deal with handoffs, stopovers, curbside, and using commercial carriers. Correct. I guess the first one would be 3 AAC 306-995, and it says notwithstanding other provisions, and 1, retail stores may permit the ordering of marijuana or marijuana products over the phone by internet. Retail store may permit curbside delivery of marijuana or marijuana products only if, and there's A, B, and C. So let's deal with that initially because that was the last big issue we discussed. Are there any questions or comments related to that first section, which would be A, large 1, large 2, large A, large B, and large C? Let me just go down the line. And Mr. Jaime, do you have any questions?
Currently, no.
Okay. Mr. DeShock, do you have any questions?
All the gyms are closed.
No.
Mr. Schulte, do you have any questions?
No.
Mr. Miller, do you have any questions of the attorney, the way this is drafted?
I don't. I'm going to read it one more time.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay. Mr. Schulte.
I apologize. I actually did have a comment on this, if I may.
Okay.
And it's, I'm not sure if you were you looking for comment on just the first couple of sections up A, B, and C?
I was looking at small a, number 1, number 2, and then large A, large B, and large C.
I'll reserve my comments then.
Okay. I guess a couple of questions I have had that I talked about when I said I don't know whether I want to support this or not, but I wanted to get the discussion going. We had several questions raised about would we permit a sale if a car had a minor in it, somebody under the age of 21. Ms. Wilson, is that something that we could write into the regulation? Is that something that it would be permissible? Would a retail store be able to verify that everybody in the vehicle was over 21? Was that something we could require?
I believe so. I mean, you require that people in the store be over 21, so in essence, you're extending the premises to that vehicle. That doesn't mean someone's not going to raise a challenge to it, but it seems like a reasonable restriction to fulfill all your mandates of public protection and to prevent diversion to minors. I can't guarantee you won't be sued, is all I'm saying, or that someone won't be sued.
I realize that if somebody drove a car to a retail, had their wife and kids in there, ran in the store, bought product, came back out of the store, that probably happens more than I would care for. But to physically deliver a product from a store in a car that had visible minors or persons they thought were minors, I have a concern about. I don't know if anybody else on the board has a particular concern about that. I know in the AMIA document, it talks about that, but it talks about people over 16 in the car is not as big a problem. I disagree with that, but is that an issue that other board members want to try to noodle through, or are we okay with some guidelines be sent out by the director, perhaps?
Through the chair.
Mr. Miller.
So I guess I'm not as concerned about minors being in the vehicle. I believe the reason we restrict access or the discussion or debate in the past was we didn't want the minors to actually see the marijuana, and we didn't want them to smell the marijuana. When this package is brought out to the vehicle, it's going to be packaged and compliant with the regulations, which means, number one, it can't be seen. I mean, so we're going to have somebody bringing a brown package to a vehicle. Yeah, older people are going to know what it is. Older teenagers are going to know what it is. But, it's just as you said earlier, someone comes into the store, they purchase marijuana, they get back in their car, their kids are in the car. It's going to be packaged the same way in that transaction if it were on a curbside transaction. So I'm not sure I have a concern about it. I was talking myself through that at the same time.
Sure. Any other comments from the board? Ms. Wilson, did the alcohol board talk about this in terms of curbside delivery of alcohol?
Maybe Carrie or Glenn can help me with that. I don't recall them talking about who was in the car. I do know that they required, of course, verification and that the person verifying the age of the recipient had a TAMS card. But
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Holscher.
In alcohol, it is not a requirement to ID everybody in the vehicle. It is a store policy, and I know a lot of stores here in Anchorage follow that policy, where they card everybody that the individual that's purchasing alcohol is with, or show that they are a guardian or a parent in some way, shape, or form. It is not a requirement in law that they ID everybody that's present for alcohol. And again, it is a store policy. If they wish to do that in the alcohol regulated world.
Okay, thank you. All right. In the alcohol world, if I don't drive, but I wanted to go with a friend, and that friend was under 21 and was legally able to drive, could I purchase alcohol and have it delivered to the car as long as it was being delivered to me and I had proof of ID even though I was not in control of the vehicle and a minor was?
I'm so sorry, what? Yeah.
You asked some questions that the board hadn't considered, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I think they were assuming that the driver was also the purchaser.
Well,
and they're not done either.
I've been in the alcohol regulation business as a treatment and prevention and shoulder tap provider for most of my government career. So I go back to those roots very often, and I guess that would be the case here if a person that was not the purchaser was driving and the purchaser was a passenger. Anyway, I may be raising some issues that get enforcement in trouble for enforcing something that we don't talk about. So I really want to talk about this. But I'm also cognizant of the time, and I did promise people we would have some public testimony on non-agenda items.
And I have requested, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I've requested advice from our open meeting folks about whether we can go beyond the extended time. I'm waiting for a response.
Right, and I know Mr. Jaime has, after 4 o'clock, has other business, and I would just as soon get through this if we could. I guess the other question that I have on here is that the licensee extends the video surveillance requirements of 3 AAC 306-720 to include the area designated for curbside delivery. If the licensee could not designate an area for curbside delivery, i.e. they did not have access to guaranteed parking that's theirs, didn't have issues of the right-of-way, how could and just how far can the licensee extend the video surveillance? And I guess the question is, we now require all premises to be under video surveillance 24/7. So would a licensee need to extend that video coverage to the designated area 24/7 and always be on? If they only do, they say deliveries between the 2 and 3 in the afternoon or 6 or 7 at night. So I guess the question is, in order to be in compliance with this, would they have some ability to extend their coverage to that designated area 24/7? Mr. Miller, do you have any idea how you might approach that?
I would expect the guidance or the regulation that we put out to say that that it would meet the same video requirements that we already have, right? It's no different. Must be well lit, must be able to identify people, must be stored for, I apologize, I don't remember, but I should know. You know, the requirement should be the same.
No, that's okay. And I guess that would be the question if I wasn't the driver and the camera was set up to take a picture as people would normally park, where the driver would be the most visible person, and the person actually purchasing was in the right-hand passenger seat in the back, they may not be in camera view. So I guess that would be a question that a retailer would have to work out. somehow, because they need to have that person who's actually purchasing on camera at the time of purchasing, which means there might be minors, then will be on that camera. There could be unrelated persons on that camera. So I guess that's another question as to why we would extend this curbside with cameras. But any other board members have any questions regarding C, though, the extending the video surveillance? Mr. Miller, do you have any idea how long a provider might take to up their camera coverage from 20 feet to, say, 50 feet away from the door to add those particular cameras so that they would be set up? Is that going to be something they're going to be able to do immediately?
I would venture to say in Anchorage, because I'm most familiar with Anchorage, that we don't have parking lots that are 50 feet long, right? So our entire parking lots are currently covered with video cameras, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So maybe in the more rural areas, it might be a little different, but just based on my experience in Anchorage, if you park at a retail establishment, you're on camera.
With enough that you can identify the persons.
Yes, if you pick the right parking spots and identify them as a curbside spot, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, is there any other questions on that particular section of this order? Okay, then moving on, the B, small b, says notwithstanding any other provisions of 3.
Mr. Chair, I was on mute, and I'm just going back to all your discussion points if you still wanted to focus on curbside delivery.
Sure.
I'm looking for some of the other guardrails you were talking about. One had to do is, should you even be designating public rights of way as areas where people can have pickup? That is, do they need a parking lot is a question. I think you addressed all your conditional use zoning issues. An issue I thought about after the fact is usually you have signs inside the store about the dangers of marijuana, et cetera. That's not going to be applicable here. I just want to make sure that the board's good with that. And I think those are the main issues.
Technically, those warnings are on the labels that get delivered. We could ask them to post that on the door, but then if they stay in the car, they wouldn't see it anyway. I think that may be one of those temporary things that we have to sort of rely on.
And then one last thing is, if you need operating plan changes that can be approved by the director, or if you're just giving a broad approval to everyone who might do this.
I think that you're right. I think that could we add a D?
You can add. I just threw in any ideas, so you can add as much as you want. Very good.
Well, I was thinking that we could add into this that they need to submit a temporary operating change to reflect their change in camera coverage and their change in process, detailing out how they will do curbside delivery, that the office in this emergency would waive the operating plan change fee, and the director may give temporary approval. Can we put that in the regulation?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Wilson, did I hear a yes?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Does anybody have any problem with adding that into this section of the regulation? That way, the the office will be notified who's doing the delivery, what their processes are. The director can give temporary approval, and it will not cost the business any change fee for just that purpose.
That all sounds good to me.
Yeah. And Mr. Chair, could you perhaps add a requirement that the licensee ensures that their activities are permissible under municipal or local law, and that they
Yes,
take that into plan?
That would be fine with me too. Okay, well, we will add that section there, and then let's move on to B. I know we're going to have another meeting early next week, because I think the attorney's going to have to redraft this document. We're going to need to look at it before we can approve to move it on. So anyway, B is notwithstanding any provisions of 3AC 306, the following transportation requirements of 7850 are amended to permit the following. So I see that we approved allowing handoff of transfers, so the attorney's going to need to draft that into B.
Through the chair,
Mr. Miller.
can we ask the attorney if it has to be a regulation change, or can it just be, can the board put on the record their interpretation?
Sure.
Regulation?
I do not believe it would have to be a regulatory change. I would recommend that the director put out, or the enforcement officer put out an advisory on that, and it might be just as quick for me to draft a regulation as for those processes to occur. So that's a yes. You don't need a regulation change, but it may be just as timely to create it.
Okay, Mr. Miller, you okay with that?
I'd prefer not to do the regulation change if not required.
Well,
just not send
maybe if she drafts the regulatory change, then that gets worded into the advisory and not into the regulation.
Thank you.
Okay. The next one is stopovers. I assume that has to come under B in the regulation.
Yes, sir. Oh, well,
Okay.
actually, the question is it already there in that it's a necessary stop? I think that's a question Mr. Miller and I were discussing.
Okay. Then I will leave that up to you. If it needs to be in the regulation, it needs to go there. If it's another advisory, then you can draft that for the board, and we can look at that advisory before it goes out.
Yes, definitely.
Through the chair, this is Jaime. Didn't we vote no on that one? As a board, didn't we vote no?
No, we did not. We voted 3-2 on a yes.
Oh, okay.
We did vote down the checked luggage, so I wasn't going to mention that. And we did vote on the allow the transport of a product using commercial carriers. I'm sure that needs to be a regulation change. So there's at least two that go under B, maybe three, or maybe one goes under B. But I just wanted to get those on the record that we had supported stopovers. We had supported using commercial carriers, and we had supported the handoffs. And I will let the attorney work on whether those go out as advisories or what, if that has to be under number B.
Okay.
Then that brings us to number C. Notwithstanding any other provisions, the following package requirements are amended to permit the following. Does that need to be in here given our discussion of the delegation of the package?
It does not. You can remove it.
Okay, so C will go away. Now, the attorney also mentioned that D talks more about alcohol beverages. Is there a D, E, and F?
I've changed D to diversion of marijuana or marijuana products. I apologize for not catching that.
Okay.
I also changed the definition of curbside delivery to marijuana or marijuana products. So.
Okay. And it's in there that an area within 50 feet of the entry to a licensed business premises.
Correct, if that's what the board agrees on.
Okay. Well, I guess that would be the question, partly because of camera coverage, and I'm trying to figure out what 50 feet would be, given that some urban streets, the right of way, if they were parked across the street, those would easily be more than 50 feet from a door. If they, so is everybody okay with D and E? Okay, hearing none. The only other question I have is, you said that if this regulation were to pass, and assume it would go through a process through the governor's office to the lieutenant governor, and be effective immediately, unless it is passed on a permanent basis, it expires on 120 days from whenever the lieutenant governor signs. Is that the right rule?
That's the date. Yeah, it becomes effective upon the lieutenant governor's signature, and it lasts for 120 days unless you engage in further rulemaking, including public comment, to make the changes permanent.
Okay. The question is, since this is an emergency, if the governor were to, June 1, say there's no longer an emergency,
right.
Do these regulations go away, or can the board act to terminate these regulations as opposed to making them permanent? What I understand the rules are, if we do nothing in 120 days, but are there parameters that mean that these go away without our consent, i.e. the emergency is not declared, or can we shorten the time frame up front, or can we shorten the time frame in the middle?
I believe you can do, in addition to the 120 days, you can write in these regulations that these regulations will terminate 120 days, or the length of the public health disaster declaration, whichever is less, or you can say, or a date identified by the Marijuana Control Board, whichever is less. So you can I don't really think the board wants to go beyond the public health declaration. I'm trying to figure out the value of that.
Right.
Of that.
Are there any comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Schulte?
Mr. Schulte.
I apologize. You were asking for comment earlier, and I was furiously trying to unmute myself before you moved on.
Okay.
I think Ms. Wilson already addressed this. So I just want to make sure that paragraph D has some verbiage that pertains more to the alcohol side. I think this is more of a technical.
Yeah, I'm
edit,
so embarrassed.
No, you're doing an awful lot in a very short time. No, okay. I wouldn't. I thought she had said that. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, we'll get a second look at this.
Okay. It looks awesome, by the way. Thank you.
Okay.
Jane Sawyer was amazing. Please thank her.
Awesome, Jane.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Through the chair, I have one question.
Mr. Miller.
Is E necessary based on all the other guardrails we've put up about the video surveillance and other items up above for the curbside? And the reason I ask is, obviously, this was based probably off the alcohol template. They don't have the video surveillance requirements and all that we have in our marijuana businesses. So is that just that 50 feet kind of an arbitrary thing? As long as it's under video surveillance, if it's 51 feet away, do we care?
Ms. Wilson.
Oh, that's a question to me.
Or whoever.
Yeah.
Through the chair, this is Director Klinkart.
Yes.
Yeah, I think when there was discussions about this, we just we wanted to set a limit so that to prevent somebody from smartly just saying, well, my curbside delivery is half a mile or 18 blocks away. But I think that whatever the board thinks would be reasonable to frame it, I would be all for it. Over.
We could say, or an area within video surveillance of the entry to license these business premises. But does that open it too wide, I guess is the question.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
I think if we were just kind of building on what Ms. Wilson just said, if we were going to go that far, perhaps we should put in something like immediately adjacent to the entrance and within video surveillance, just to keep the discussion. Because I'm just seeing people getting into circular debates with the office or with enforcement, and I think anything we can do to stem that, I think, would be good.
And I think this would be a good definition to have in the regulation in whatever form it does, so that can be addressed in the operating plan change. I think, Mr. Schulte, if you could restate what you just said, and we'll get it on the record, and then I think the attorney could work that into that definition.
Okay.
I understood.
You understood it, Ms. Wilson? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if I understand the process, we've been through all of this. We have looked at the emergency regulation. The attorney has a little bit of work to clean up. We need to come back together to look at the final product. What would be the earliest we would be trying to set another meeting? And I guess I'll turn to the attorney because it's her work time that's going to dictate that, I guess.
Well, I'm willing to work over the weekend. It's not me. What I want to make sure is that the public has adequate notice and still respond to industry concerns. I would request 72 hours beginning Monday morning, so that would make it a Wednesday meeting, if you don't think that's too far out to ask for.
Okay. Just quickly, if we limited the meeting to a couple hours on Wednesday the 15th, I could do that as long as it was after 12. Before that, I am tied up with city business, and I'm tied up that evening with finance committee meetings. So let me just ask real quick, Mr. Miller, is Wednesday at 1 o'clock good for you?
It is. Can I ask one quick question?
Certainly.
Would that meeting include the advisory language as well?
Yes.
I hope so, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Schulte, 1 o'clock Wednesday?
You caught me drinking water. Yes, absolutely. 1 o'clock Wednesday.
Mr. Jaime?
As of right now, I'm checking my calendar. As of right now, that appears that I'd be available for that. If anything changes, I'll let you know. Right now, yes.
Okay. Mr. DeShock?
I am not. You have, how long is the expected duration?
I would hope that we could get it done within 2 hours. Hopefully an hour, but I think we need to schedule a couple just in case.
Just 1 second.
Sorry about that. That's my dog. Okay.
Mr. DeShock,
yeah,
we're talked over.
Yeah, sorry, I put myself on mute. So earlier in the day is better for me. I get tied up at about 1:15.
Okay. How about 11 o'clock on Wednesday? Would 11 o'clock work, Mr. Miller?
Yes. Sorry, mute button.
Mr. Schulte, would 11 o'clock work?
Sure, works for me.
Okay. Mr. Jaime, is 11 o'clock work?
Yes, sir, as of now.
Okay. Mr. DeShock, would 11 o'clock help you?
Yes.
Okay. Then Mr. Klinkard, try to schedule it for 11 o'clock on Wednesday, April 15th.
And Mr.
Alrighty,
Chair?
and 2 hours, sir?
Well,
yes.
I have a point on that.
Ms. Wilson.
Mr. Chair, I would say do not put a termination time on it because if you get to the end of your time, you can continue the meeting the next day as long as you announce it at that meeting or any other designated time. So I was
fine.
starting at 11 to give public notice.
All right. And make sure on the public notice that we're not going to take public testimony because I think we need to go through this fairly quickly.
Okay, fully noted.
So in about 10 minutes, I would like to go to public comment. We do have one more piece of time, and that is Ms. Sawyer's request that came out in an email from her. It's basically a memo to us about extending the protest period for local governments, I believe, to 30-day extension of the 60-day deadline. I know that our government is really tied up. So I guess to Ms. Wilson, is this something that we can do? Or is this something that needs to be part of the regulation change we're looking at?
When I first advised Ms. Sawyer, I thought it was something you could do. Now I'm thinking, let's just put it in the regulatory packet. And the other thing I have learned is that when we're doing suspensions of state lines like this, we still want to put it past the governor's office. So I don't believe I had let Ms. Sawyer know that at the time. I'll do that immediately.
Okay. Does anybody on the board have any objections to working into the regulation and extension of the local government protest period?
Mr. Chairman, this is Bruce Schulte.
Mr. Schulte.
So if I understand correctly, it would be worked into this work product we've been discussing, but we're not necessarily agreeing to it at this point.
That's correct. That's something that we will talk about on Wednesday.
Okay.
But Ms. Sawyer did send the memo. It did talk about her request for us to look at that and to go past the 60-day deadline. Her example was 30-day extension to the 60-day. We can certainly shorten that or lengthen that. That's probably a good, reasonable time. Take a look at that memo, and the attorney will work that into our product, and then we can talk about it on Wednesday.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This is Jane. I just wanted to make a clarification because when I was working on this, I literally just fixed some of the language on the very top, and I didn't realize that I didn't fix the first paragraph. There are no relocation allowed for marijuana, just so it's on my record. And it's under 3 AAC 306.060 that the 60-day period for the local government.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay. Thank you for all of the discussion today. And so it is now 3:45.
Can I ask one quick question through the chair?
Mr. Miller.
Sorry. Was the same request made for alcohol?
Is that Chair?
Yes, Ms. Sawyer.
Yes, Mr. Miller, it was, and the alcohol board chose not to act on it. They didn't consider it as an emergency right now.
Okay, and then the one other question I had is, how will this affect the big renewal season coming up?
Well, it would extend from 60 to 90 days if it's a 30-day period. And what happens is when this would affect a local government or us in a way that a local government, when they don't respond within the 60 days. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. Okay. If the local government does not respond within the 60 days, they basically forgo their opportunity. But we, the office, must wait out the 60 days. If you extend it 30 days, we must wait 90 days. We with the renewal or the new application or whatever.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, just one more comment that maybe we consider that if a local government requests that we extend it to 90 days, we do so. If we don't have such a request, we act on 60 days. And I don't know if that'll cause confusion or not, but just a thought.
Yeah, through the chair. And that was my thought too. And I was wondering what Mr. Jones' thoughts on this were, because he is part of a local government. Again, the alcohol board did not vote, but did not act on it. So if you do act on it and you vote on it to have an extension, then our office is going to be dealing with those two things. And it might create confusion to certain local governments.
It might, if a local government wanted to, maybe we could work it in. If they ask for an extension, we could grant it. I know Anchorage, instead of asking for an extension, just simply says, we protest conditionally because they don't have all the permits. And so what we do is we do it with delegation, and if that takes 6 months or a year to go through the Anchorage process, then that license never gets issued. That's about the only municipality I know of that routinely says every license we protest it. So I don't know if any local community would take advantage of the 60 or 90 days, but I know that in the governor's order, a lot of deadlines for municipalities have been waived. Title 29, most every department have waived dates that municipalities have to do things because staff are all spread out and tied up. So let's see what it looks like, and we can always strike it if we don't want to do that on Wednesday.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schulte.
Just one more note on this, if I may. I don't disagree with anything that's been said thus far. One concern that I have in the back of my mind is how this might affect applications that are currently in the pipeline. Staff has done a fantastic job of getting them through, so the number from our last meeting is quite low, but I would still, when we do consider this, to be helpful, I think, to either have an accounting from staff on how many licenses are sort of in pending category, or have an opportunity for those licensees to address the board and give us their thoughts on it, because I think that's one component of this discussion that's lacking.
Okay. I think that's a good point, and I'm assuming the regulation change would be from this point forward. So anything now under delegation or anything that we approved at this last meeting that the protest period was 60 days, it still stays at 60 days. There may be some others, but I guess that'll be for the attorney to give us some guidance on. Okay, if there's no other questions, we will meet again on Wednesday the 15th at 11 o'clock a.m. I would now like to offer an opportunity for comment on non-agenda items for anybody in the public that's still managing to hang on with us. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address the marijuana board on items not on our today's agenda?
Yeah, hello, this is Kirby Coleman here.
Yes, Kirby.
Yeah, would like to address action taken by the board at the beginning of last meeting about directing public comment to a certain group of people. I thought that was really, truly a bad move and unfair as the public is, you're taking away from the number one word in that subject is the public. You can't direct public comment to a certain group or entity. Although I'm a member of the AMIA, I have other things that are not the agenda of the AMA. So that was one thing I wanted to tell you guys. Today's agenda was a little unclear for the public's eyes. I understand that. There was also the memorandum from giving the director authority that you guys had this open discussion about that never really got closed on last meetings. So a little unclear as far as where that ended up in the last meeting. And I thought that was something that was going to be discussed today, which it wasn't. So that was the second thing. And then I just wanted to point out to in the public safety and health sector of this discussion taking place today, something that was not brought up was surface-to-surface contact. That there's a huge avenue that we could really help mitigate this spread of the COVID-19. I know, anyway, that was on today's agenda, so I just wanted to point that out. That's something that's huge that was not talked about that you guys should really consider, that how curbside delivery and delivery would really mitigate those issues on surface-to-surface contact and spreading this the COVID-19. So appreciate you guys' time today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Coleman. Is there anybody else online?
This is Colleen from AK Joint.
Yes. You give your first and last name, please.
Colleen Howard.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Howard.
I was wondering if you would consider with the curbside delivery a drive-through aspect of that.
We weren't taking public comment. You've made your comment, and we'll address that probably on Wednesday next week.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there any other public comment on the items we have not talked about today? Okay. With that, I will close public comment. I appreciate Mr. Coleman's comment. We did state on the agenda that we might limit public participation, given this was a scheduled meeting that was supposed to be face-to-face, and we did it temporarily by phone. We're going to, all these next meetings will be by phone. Hopefully by June, we can be back together face-to-face. But if not, we will try to set aside time for public comment for everybody. And I appreciate that feeling that maybe some public comment was not addressed, we can blame the emergency, or we can blame that we weren't sure how long it was going to take us to get through an agenda. But so anyway, we will take that under consideration, and I personally will take that under consideration.
Just brought it up right now.
Is there any other comments by the board members? All right, I thank you, and I appreciate the work done today, and hopefully the attorney can get us a draft next week, and we can meet on Wednesday at 11 o'clock and finalize this so we can move forward. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting of the Marijuana Control Board at 3:54 p.m. and wish you all a good weekend.
Thank you.